This is a CNN special report. America's new war.
We have structural collapse next to the heliport.
Tonight, the investigation. Did the FBI have two of the hijackers in its sights before the attack? A plan for the future. President Bush readies the nation for war.
We will find those who did it. We will smoke them out of their holes. We will get them running. And we'll bring them to justice.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound.
And a man on a mission. A mission to find his daughter and bring her home alive.
I don't have any video of her. To be honest with you, Melissa didn't like to be videoed. She used to holler at me every time I did. I'd give anything to ever holler at her now.
This is a CNN special report. America's new war. From New York, here's Aaron Brown.
Good evening again. The sirens in the background Saturday night in New York City. The lights of the rescue site behind us, not exactly where we expected to be, not at all. But then almost nothing about this week is as expected. Certainly the men and women at Ground Zero didn't expect to be dredging through tons of wreckage and debris, searching for 5,000 missing people. The New York Fire Department didn't expect to be mourning the death of their chaplain and a number of their chiefs. And thousands of families didn't expect to be heartbroken because a son or a daughter, a spouse, a father never came home from work on Tuesday. All of it is unexpected, and every bit of it is sad. In the next 2 hours, a review of the day that has been and a look at what lies ahead on a day when the president proclaimed it is war, a war with an invisible enemy. First, we want to update you on what has gone on today. Here are the latest headlines to date. The Pentagon has activated 35,000 reservists under a military operation it has just declared Operation Noble Eagle, a name you'll hear a lot in the days ahead. These troops will help with what the president calls homeland defenses, making this country safe. And in New York today, a second arrest warrant has been issued. This for a material witness in the terrorist attacks. Federal prosecutors say this witness is not in custody and has not yet been identified publicly. The president formally warned the American public today, quote, "We are at war." And he said the United States was fighting a new kind of enemy, a hidden foe on a worldwide but undefined battlefield. The president also called on America's fighting men and women to get ready. And in Lower Manhattan, of course, the search for survivors goes on as it has been going on since Tuesday. So far, more than 150 bodies have been recovered, and the number of missing climbs towards 5,000. Fire and rescue officials, it was a day to honor fallen comrades.
Patriots from distant ages, seen so longing for their end. Prophets, overseers, and sages all await a beyond.
This was the massive Christian burial for Fire Department Chaplain Michael Judge, Fire Chief Peter Gansey, and First Deputy Fire Commissioner William Feehan were also buried today. Those are the headlines at the top of the hour. As you look at this satellite image of Lower Manhattan, this is the area right in the center of your screen. You can see that plume of smoke where the World Trade Center towers once stood. You see more clearly, perhaps, or the breadth of the damage. Consider this as a satellite photo, how large that area of destruction is and how clear the plume of smoke is. Just a few blocks away, 40 or 50 blocks away from where we are. Quite a stunning scene. Among the most disquieting bits of news today were signs that the FBI had the names of two of the people who were involved, or at least appear to have been involved in the hijacking, and that they may have been tied to another terrorist attack and to one of the world's most prominent terrorists. One of our national correspondents, CNN's Eileen O'Connor, is part of the team that has been working on the investigative side of the story. And Eileen joins us now. Good evening.
Good evening, Aaron. Well, as you said, very disturbing and has just increased the sense of urgency this investigation has. Investigators seek accomplices and associates of the hijackers, people they believe perhaps are also people who may have been trying to hijack other planes and were thwarted in their attempt or were helping the hijackers. This is like an enormous puzzle, investigators are telling me. Actually, more like 3 or 4 puzzles all jumbled together. They have people all over the world, Aaron, finding pieces, trying to fit them together. And they're also digging back into puzzles they thought they'd already solved, finding pieces they missed. What's really disturbing now, exhausted as they are, is that these pieces didn't fit together earlier in time to prevent these tragedies. They booked the tickets on American Airlines Flight 77 from Washington to Los Angeles on Travelocity using a New Jersey address, mailboxes, etc. And names U.S. officials confirm were known to them. Khalid al-Midhar and Salim al-Hamzi, once on board, together with al-Hamzi's brother and an old roommate, a known pilot, they took over the flight, crashing it into the Pentagon. Within minutes, the facade of a symbol of American strength crumbled. As the search and rescue efforts continue, sources say the FBI was informed that Khalid al-Midhar and Salim al-Hamzi were associated with Osama bin Laden and the bombing of the USS Cole. One source confirms al-Midhar was seen on surveillance tape in Malaysia, meeting with the suspect in that bombing.
One was kind of short and the other two was tall.
Al-Midhar was a frequent visitor of al-Hamzi and his brother Nawak in the San Diego apartment complex.
It was always together. If they left, it was together. They come back, they're together.
They hung out a lot at the pool, despite telling their neighbors they were studying at a nearby college.
You'll see 3 of them in the pool swimming, or you'll see the dude always looking out the window, another one outside the door on the phone.
At one point, they left, telling one landlord they were in Arizona, living in different cities at different addresses. As it turns out, rooming with another hijacker aboard that plane, Hani Hanjour. Hani attended this flying school, CRM, Cockpit Resource Management, but left without a certification.
He's kind of a waste of time. He wouldn't show up for flights on time, didn't do his homework.
Not a promising student, but skilled enough to carry out the mission. And what is really frustrating and confusing to these investigators, slowing down their job, Aaron, is the fact that many of these men may have used aliases, may have used the same names, and also used very similar names. So it's really confusing things because as you come up with computer records, you're not really sure. They might have the same names, but are these really the same men? Aaron?
Well, that's the problem in part. I mean, here they have these names, presumably, perhaps they're the same people. Are they, in Washington, investigators second-guessing intelligence sources and their effectiveness here? Or is that just hindsight?
Well, what they are doing is going back over everything, and we're talking about incidences all the way back into the 1980s. I mean, this is a tragedy of such huge proportions that nobody wants to really be pointing fingers at each other. It's just too serious. But certainly there is a sense of frustration that perhaps there were some pieces that were missed before. Perhaps they had one piece and another piece was over there and they just didn't get it together in time. Aaron?
And how long were these guys living in San Diego?
They were living there, in fact, on and off for several years, and at some point, as I said, they lived in Arizona. And tonight, in fact, I've just confirmed with sources that a man who may have been, may be the brother of the al-Hamzis looks to be, he is in custody. I've confirmed this tonight on an INS violations. Police are looking at him, but again, he may be the brother. Again, it could be a case of mistaken identity. So they are, though, seeking accomplices of these men. They know that there are still people on the ground, Aaron, who had to have helped them in this hijacking and in all of these tragedies, putting these planes into these buildings. Aaron.
And just going back to where you began, Eileen, this putting together these pieces of the puzzle, more and more it looks like when you get all of the pieces together, you get the face of Osama bin Laden.
You do, and also you get the very broad face of his support, and that is what is very scary to investigators. I mean, what's happening here, Aaron, is you're seeing links to groups in Pakistan, Algeria. I've picked up a name today that could be a Chechen name. We're also seeing links back to Lebanese, the bombing of the Beirut embassy in the early 80s, and that's a Lebanese connection. So all of these connections are very disturbing because it shows that these groups have somehow come together and united, and that is certainly a very daunting opponent. Aaron?
It is indeed. Eileen, thank you. Thank you for your work today. All of this is a good thing to keep in mind, how broad this all is as we go along in the broadcast tonight and start to talk about the military options, the possibilities. It's not just simply hitting a village somewhere. You've got people spread out over a wide area. Also spread out over a wide area is the federal investigation, not just of the people who may have been directly involved in the hijackings and the tragedy on Tuesday, but those people who may have offered them assistance and safe haven. Mike Betcher in Atlanta has been working on that part of the story, and Mike joins us now. Mike, good evening.
Good evening, Aaron. Well, they've issued a federal warrant for one man they want as a material witness, but he is not in custody. And a Justice Department spokesman, Mindy Tucker, said and indicated this is just the beginning. You're going to see a lot more of this, more people arrested and warrants issued as material witnesses in this crime. There is one man already arrested as a material witness. He was detained on Thursday when he was taken off a flight. He had a fake pilot's identification. He was actually charged on Friday as a material witness. And also there are 25 other people in detention by the INS, and the FBI is speaking to them. Some, we are told, are cooperating, so we should see a lot more actual arrests made coming very soon. Now, the FBI is also trying to learn as much as they can about the 19 known hijackers aboard those 4 aircraft, and they have developed a list of characteristics. Now, it's a common trait of characteristics, and if we can put that up, here are a few of them. The list is actually quite long and has a lot of different characteristics, but we've seen the FBI list, and of course there's the obvious. All of them are male, most in their early 20s, likely to have Saudi passports, likely to have visas issued in Saudi Arabia, clean-shaven, and Western appearance. But what we also have is the training manual of Al-Qaeda, the bin Laden organization. So if indeed this was a bin Laden operation, they would have followed this training manual. So let's take a look at these characteristics and go to the training manual and compare them. Now, if you look at the characteristics where they talk about likely to have Saudi passports and likely to have visas issued in Saudi Arabia, in the manual it says, the bin Laden manual, it says all documents of the undercover brother, such as identity card and passport, should be falsified. Now, in that list given by the FBI, they said most had Saudi passports, but judging by that, it's no guarantee that they actually are Saudi Arabian citizens or those are actually valid passports. Let's go back to the list. Let's look at the last one, clean-shaven, Western appearance. Okay, let's go to the bin Laden manual and see what they say about that. The photograph of the brother in these documents should be without a beard. So they're saying in the documents, let's say, for example, a false passport or a driver's license, they should be clean-shaven so they do not bring attention to themselves as perhaps being Muslim. And there is one other common characteristic, but it has nothing to do with personal characteristics. It has to do with targets. Let's go back to the bin Laden manual. And in that, there is a final you can see it on the bottom. It's number 7. It's hard to read. Here we go. It's coming up. This is in terms of picking targets. And this will send some chills up if you read this. Blasting and destroying the embassies and attacking vital economic centers. If this was indeed Al-Qaeda, they sure did follow that last part of the bin Laden training manual. Aaron?
Well, I agree. That's pretty chilling stuff. Just give me a sense, Michael, if today the investigation took small steps forward or a large step? Is there any sense that they moved as rapidly as they seemed to the previous days?
I think they're making large steps forward right now in terms of finding the people who they want to question, who may have more knowledge about this. I think that's the code that's being thrown out right now, Aaron, about these 25 in detention on immigration charges that they were here illegally. The FBI is not interviewing them because their visas have expired. They're interviewing them because they believe at least some of them know something or know someone who knows something about this case. And today, Mindy Tucker at the Justice Department clearly indicated you're going to see a lot more of these arrest warrants coming out.
And in that sense, going back to something Eileen was talking about, does the investigation seem to be broader than maybe we all first thought at the beginning? That is to say, more citizens of more countries around the world, both the investigation here and abroad.
No, as early as Wednesday, my sources in the intelligence community here and abroad were telling me of an intensive effort to go back over all of these past cases, and that the focus was on various terrorist groups, especially in North Africa, and especially Algerians and Egyptians. One particular group would be Al-Jihad or Islamic Jihad. The leader of that is one of the top lieutenants of bin Laden. They're really looking closely at that. Eileen mentioned the 1983 Marine barracks bombing. One person they're looking at to see if he might have a connection to this is Imad Mughniya, who before this terrible terrorist act at the Pentagon and at the World Trade Center had killed more Americans than any other terrorist, but nobody knows his name. No one's seen him in 21 years. So they're broadening it out, and I am told that so many skills were required, so many people were needed, the expertise so great that it had to be an amalgamation of groups operating under the Al-Qaeda umbrella.
You know, Mike, thanks. Mike Betcher in Atlanta. We'll probably never know the answer to how this first began, who first had the idea, but we're going back 20 plus years. That's something. The president today called it a war. About this time last night when we talked to you, we did not tell you where the president was spending the weekend for security reasons. We said he was out of the White House. We can tell you that he's at Camp David, and that's where he held meetings today, and that's where he briefly talked with reporters. And White House correspondent Major Garrett joins us now to talk more about the president's pointed words and warnings and the rest. Major, good evening to you.
Good evening to you, Aaron. You mentioned when you were talking to Eileen that the pictures, or the pieces of the puzzle, rather, describe or create an image of one person, Osama bin Laden. Well, President Bush went a little bit further than that today, identifying Osama bin Laden as the prime suspect behind the terrorist attacks on Tuesday. Senior administration officials hastened to add, however, that he is not the only suspect the United States is looking at, nor would be the only one to feel the United States' wrath if, in fact, it is confirmed they are also involved in Tuesday's terrorist activities. Full day of national security meetings for the president at that presidential retreat at Camp David. Who exactly is in the president's National Security Council? Who was he talking to today? Well, the CIA director, his chief of staff, Andy Card, Secretary of State Colin Powell, his national security advisor, Condoleezza Rice, Vice President Cheney, also the Attorney General was there. And during that, but before that meeting, the president talked to reporters, and he said that the United States will spare no effort in searching out and finding those responsible for the atrocities on Tuesday.
We're at war. There's been an act of war declared upon America by terrorists, and we will respond accordingly. And I appreciate very much the American people understanding that. As we plan, as we put our strategy into action, we will let you know when we think it's appropriate, not only for to protect the lives of our servicemen and women, but to make sure our coalition has had proper time to be noticed as well. But we're going to act.
We're going to act, and the president believes he will be acting whenever the United States act with the full support of a broadening coalition. The White House received more encouraging information about exactly how broad that coalition might in fact become. The government of Pakistan, through the President Pervez Musharraf, told the United States that they will fully cooperate, providing airspace and other vital assets to the United States government should in fact some action be taken against Pakistan's neighbor, Afghanistan, of course, home ground for Osama bin Laden. Also, Chief Representative of the Arab League told the United States government that it would be fully cooperative with the United States, providing it received proper consultation ahead of time about the actions to come. As all this was happening, the president tried to lay the rhetorical groundwork and prepare the American public for the very difficult times ahead. And in his radio address, he said the campaign against terrorism worldwide would in fact be a long one, and some sacrifice would be expected of everyone.
I will not settle for a token act. Our response must be sweeping, sustained, and effective. We have much to do and much to ask of the American people. You will be asked for your patience, for the conflict will not be short. You will be asked for resolve, for the conflict will not be easy. You will be asked for your strength, because the course to victory may be long.
All of this part of the president's effort to prepare the country for the difficult days ahead. And Aaron, if I could, I'd like to take everyone in our audience back to the very earliest moments of this catastrophe. Tuesday morning, Sarasota, Florida. I was traveling with the president, as were many other reporters. And we have some videotape I'd like to show you, because this moment will be recorded, as will so many others, in the history books. It's when Andrew Card, the White House Chief of Staff, whispers something to the president, and you see his expression change, become grave, become very beclouded with a sense of emotion. I'm going to tell you right now exactly what Andy Card said to the president when he leaned over. Now, you must understand, at this time, the president is already aware that one jet airliner has crashed into one tower of the World Trade Center. Andy Card said, a second plane hit the other tower, and America's under attack. We learned that only yesterday when Andy Card, the White House Chief of Staff, told that to pool reporters traveling with the president to New York City. Andy Card described it as a surreal moment. Absolutely. Aaron?
Well, that's some picture to look at. What you can't know, I suppose, is what was, well, not I suppose, what you can't know is what was going on in the president's mind at that point. Here's a guy who was a major, here's a guy who was 8 months or so into his term, and all of a sudden, sitting in a schoolroom in Florida, confronted with an extraordinary piece of information and an extraordinary challenge. And surely he knew in that moment that his administration, his presidency, that he himself were forever changed.
Changed forever, the world possibly changed forever. And it's worth pointing out this, Aaron, I think. At that moment, this president found himself in a position no other U.S. president had ever found himself, understanding that an act of war had been committed against American civilians. We can think about the grave moments many other U.S. presidents have had to deal with. President Lincoln receiving the horrific dispatches from Fredericksburg, Shiloh, Gettysburg. Perhaps FDR learning of the death toll at D-Day. Harry Truman learning of the death toll in Korea as the Army had to move backward almost to the southern end of the peninsula against the Chinese. Lyndon Johnson going through the daily death count in Vietnam. All of those presidents coping with the real tragedy of American service personnel dying. But at that moment, this president knew he was dealing with civilians who had been attacked and had at that time had no conception of how grave, how serious, how numerous the casualties would be. But he became a very unique American president at that moment.
He did indeed. One quick policy matter. The president talked about the coalition. You mentioned the coalition. Is there in fact a coalition? And by that I mean not just people saying we're going to help, but the kind of coalition that we saw in the Persian Gulf War, where there were clear commitments. People were making resource commitments that you could actually see, not just words, but things you could actually see.
Well, that is exactly the effort that the administration is going through now. Senior administration officials describe it as a you are either for us or you are against us moment for all of the world. And roll will be called only once, we have been told, and you will either be with us or against us. And when, for example, in the case of Pakistan, there have been times before where there had been these sort of airy words of support, but nothing definitive. Pakistani airspace is definitive, very much so. You'll recall that in 1998 when President Clinton had to fire cruise missiles into Afghanistan, the United States was denied Pakistani airspace and also denied Pakistani human intelligence, which might have been very valuable in pinning down the precise location of Osama bin Laden. Both things have now been offered up to the United States, as well as efforts throughout Pakistan to control the border with Afghanistan. Tangible assets now provided to the United States government. Is it a real coalition? Does it have all the definitive qualities the United States now wants and now expects to have? Not quite yet, but the administration is clearly moving in that direction. Aaron?
Major thanks. Major Garrett at the White House today. A lot of interesting stuff there. Nicely done. Thank you. Let's go to Atlanta. Former General Wesley Clark joins us, as he has each night and throughout the day, in fact, to help us deal with the military questions that are just, it seems to me, forming. I've got a bunch of them today, General Clark. Welcome again. Here we go.
Thanks, Aaron. Okay.
The President and the White House today pointedly, clearly, unmistakably did not rule out the possibility of ground forces. I guess we have to define the battle first, don't we?
Well, I think it's important to keep all the options on the table. We've been through this before, and we know that the smart move is keep all the options on the table. The big hammer is American complete commitment of ground forces with all their support. That's the big hammer. Hopefully we won't need it.
Where exactly, I don't mean to laugh about this, it's part of what is difficult here is, all right, let's start ratcheting up the military option. Who do we bomb? Where do we invade? Who do we go after? How do we do it? Where do we start? Where do we start?
Well, first we have to start with the appreciation that this is a different kind of war, as we've been discussing. It's a diplomatic strategy first. It's undergirded by sharing of information, actions by police, efforts to break up these terrorist cells, go after the headquarters. It's directed against individuals. It's not directed against facilities like airfields and so forth. But we also have to recognize that this terrorist network does have support from states. And if we were able to break it up without any use of military forces at all through effective police action in states all over the world, that's the right course of action. If we can't do that, and if there is state support, it may take more coercive means to go after them, and that may require the use of military forces. And that's how we followed down the path of military forces. But again, I think it's so important, Aaron, to underscore this may have been the second Pearl Harbor that happened on Tuesday, but I don't think you're going to see a repeat of the Second World War here.
And the reason you don't is just the nature of the battle is wholly different.
Entirely different. You're dealing against a network that's been embedded in dozens of countries around the world, including our own. It's a covert network, and it's individuals, and we got to take out the individuals.
But from the very beginning here, General, the President, the clear position of the government of the United States and the clear wishes of a good many commentators and former military and intelligence people like yourself has been, it's not enough to go after simply the bad guys. You have to go after the bad countries that have allowed the bad guys to live, to flourish, to be financed, and the rest. So it's not simply this kind of surgical thing, is it?
Well, it is, in principle, this kind of surgical thing. But we also recognize their state support. Now, those states have a choice. They can renounce it, and they can go after those terrorists, as we're asking them to today, or they can become part of the problem. We'd like them to be cooperative. We're not declaring war on states. We're declaring war on a terrorist network and the states that are going to harbor them. So if those states want to renounce it, they better renounce it now, and they better cooperate. They can become the targets of this operation.
Let me ask you one other thing along this line that actually someone emailed me a question. Let me pass it along. And maybe the math's behind you, and I don't know if you have the telestrator device with you or not. But they said if it came down to Afghanistan, there's been a lot of focus on Afghanistan, that Afghanistan is a particularly difficult country to deal with militarily. Lots of countries have tried over the last several thousand years. None have been successful. Yeah. Can you explain why it's a problem?
Well, it's a problem because of geography and culture and distance. It's